Well, thank you all for coming, and I'm glad that you decided to share some of your Sunday with me. I had said last month that there were two questions that came in on climate change, but the question that we were dealing with last month was on voting rights, and it took up the entire time. Today, the two questions came in last month, and one was from Sally Herr. My question is regarding the anticipated climate changes. What do you see astrologically regarding the environment during the next 25 years? Okay, well, this is very similar to the question that Judy asked, Judy Fitek, which was, my concern about climate change prevails. Is it possible for you to address from astrological indicators the implication of a polar cap collapse besides coastal flooding? I want to say uh, that two other questions came in the last hour. Um, I'm not going to address them today because this will take up the entire substance of what we're dealing with. But the two questions tangentially relate to this whole issue of climate change, and so I will mention them. The question was, when will we see the end of the challenges to our democracy? And the other one was, when will we be on the other side of the pandemic? Well, let's start with the obvious thing. Those of you who know me personally, I'm an optimist. I believe in the inevitable goodness of creation and what we can do to make it a better place. And we do. However, it would be remiss of me as a human being, a thinking person that has eyes and can see what's going on, as well as an astrologer, to not tell you, number one, we're never going back to the way that it was. And number two, the road ahead is longer than any of us would wish it to be. But that doesn't mean that it's endless. That doesn't mean that it goes on without interruption. It's really fascinating. And I think any astrologer that has been at it for any length of time knows that we're all historians. We all have to take the long view of everything that goes on. Otherwise, how would astrologers ever be able to tell a client anything? Because it's all based on repeating cycles. We study the cycles and we see, okay, whenever this occurs, these other things happen. Now, it's kind of important here to recognize this issue of climate change is real. As I had said before, climate change, we've entered into an irreversible cycle. About 50 years ago, we were over the tipping point. People kept saying, scientists and politicians and people who were progressive in their thinking, well, if we don't do everything that we have to do in the next 10 years, and on and on, it was already too late. If we had stopped everything that was polluting the environment that was man-made, literally 50 years ago, we would still be in a world of hurt. That having been said, what you do, what I do, what any of us does is very important. And one person doing the right thing consistently enough can change the world. Now, uh, the big cycles here are the things that we have to look at. Meaning, how do you have a chart for something that encompasses the whole world? Adrian Barbeau, looking at um, the year 2020, the conjunction of Pluto, uh, Saturn, and Jupiter in Capricorn in January of 2020, predicted in 2015 that there'd be a worldwide pandemic. Well, okay, uh, it's possible to look at these big patterns and see the difficulties that are coming if you study long enough and follow the cycles. The big cycle here is the Neptune Pluto conjunction. It happens every 498 or so years, almost 500 years. And it initiates a whole new cycle within creation. I've followed this cycle back all the way, those of you who've been in other talks of mine, back to the birth of Buddha, which was in 576 BC, at the triple conjunction of Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. One of these extremely rare phenomena every 10,000 years or so could happen. But it ushered in the modern age. Now, I'm mentioning it today because that conjunction took place in Taurus, the sign of the Earth. This is important because we're talking about the Earth. We're talking about what the Earth is doing. Any of you who have spent time in any esoteric study knows that the expression that Alice Bailey gave, the Tibetan gave to Alice Bailey, energy follows thought. So what we think about is what comes about. And people, the naysayers, can say, well, hey, I think about all kinds of stuff that isn't going to happen and I don't want to happen. But the energy that makes things materialize comes from a thought form. And collectively, this is what we've been doing. Now, all of you know that people who are anti-vaccine aren't going to take the vaccine. It doesn't matter. You can talk to them about their social responsibility or, the fact that it is safe or any of that. The battle lines are drawn. They're dug in. It is similar with climate change. Now, if we were all on the Titanic and we'd hit the iceberg and there was a bunch of bartenders that came up to us and said, hey, we got a great idea. We're going to start selling drinks at 2 for 1 and have a happy hour and we'll make a ton of money. Okay. But we know that that's ridiculous because the boat is going to sink. And those of us who are, what would you say, against the fascist mentality of the collective greed that tends to rule the planet now, knows that we have this war between what we can all see with our own eyes is going on in the environment and what people do in their everyday life. Now, we're not it goes without saying, we're not going to recycle our way out of climate change. And the climate change is here regardless. Now, Sally asked the question, what is the prognosis over the next 25 years? And I wanted to say that when, Saturn and Jupiter conjunct every 20 years. And as I've said in other talks, the Saturn-Jupiter cycle is optimistic and opening for the first 10 years of the cycle. And in 2020, in December, they conjuncted at 0 degrees of Aquarius. This is important because for the next several hundred years, they will always conjunct in air signs. And air is the abstract intellect. Now, what I'm saying, and this is really important, our thoughts, our ability to come up with tangible solutions to real problems are going to manifest. Aquarius is very optimistic, very forward-looking, and it is a fixed sign, meaning Aquarius, if you know Aquarians, they're a lot more stubborn than their air looks on the surface. And fixed is fixed. So there is a determination in this, and it will go on. Every 60 years, when Jupiter and Saturn conjunct here in the United States, but other places in the world, we go through a reformation cycle, things looking, forward, something that I may take up in the next talk. But I wanted to point out that in 1309, was it 1309? Excuse me just a second. No, 1306. The King of England banned the burning of coal because it was polluting the air of London. Think of it, 1306. Well, what was the problem at the time? The problem was that there was a war going on inside of people's minds between what's good for our physical health and what's good for our pocketbook. Now, I'm going to share this chart because I think it is emblematic of what's going on right now. Let me see. This is the coal chart for the coal ban. Now, if you'll notice, Uranus and Neptune were just getting ready to make a conjunction down here, which is another 171-year cycle, which always ushers in a time of commercial change on the planet. Uranus is the planet of breakthroughs. Neptune is the planet of culture. And so there is a transition. We went through this cycle at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution in 1821. And in our lifetime, at the dawn of the internet, we went through this in 1993. And I sent out a letter, as I've said in other talks, to all of my clients at the time. There was no internet. It was a physical letter that I sent out to people. And I described a whole bunch of stuff that was going to happen, and all of it, which did. It happened to be fairly prophetic. I knew that we were headed for a big economic change, and I knew what the internet would do. I just didn't know what it was called or how it would be implemented. But the reason that I'm mentioning it now is that at this period of the Middle Ages, they were getting ready to go through a change, and there was resistance. Now, Jupiter and Saturn were just getting ready to go through their, they had been a long cycle here, Jupiter and Saturn conjuncted 3 times. This is a part of that process, which was again getting ready to open up a new cycle. And it was in Libra, the sign of relationships. Again, it wasn't just people relating to other people. It was ideas relating to each other. How can we keep, again, how can we have, clean air and have a good business model? Now, at the time that this took effect, the King of England put forth a proclamation, and all of the parliamentarians were there, and everybody was involved in deciding. All of the hierarchy was doing this, but people at the work level, blacksmiths in particular, needed coal to make their business economically viable. So I'm just pointing out that this struggle had been going on for a very long time. Pluto at the time was just getting ready to leave Aquarius and go into Pisces, and the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction was trining it. Now, I'm just trying to see if somebody's in the waiting room. Okay, so what does that mean for us here today? I'm going to take a second here and show you a different chart. This is this chart for the first oil well. Now, why this is important, if you look at man-made climate change, it really, in my research, shows this. I could be mistaken, but it's my opinion, and it's one that I've worked on for a while. It really comes down to fossil fuel, not just the burning of fuel in cars, but plastic is made out of fossil fuel. And in 1979, there was more plastic produced than steel. We had crossed over, and of course, all of you know that there's a tremendous difficulty that we have today with how to have a closed cycle. The economic model of the Industrial Revolution was built on a linear model. And linear systems are an illusion. It's all cyclical. In other words, you don't just chop down trees, make toilet paper, use it, and that's the end of it. There is a price to pay for what we do or don't do with the end product of all of our production. Well, this is the time of the first oil well, and we know this date exactly. I can't tell you the time of day for sure, but it was August 1st, 1859 in Titusville, Pennsylvania. Now, what's interesting is, look at Pluto is squaring the Sun and Saturn, which are reasonably close to the south node of the moon, which is in Leo, which is, self. I'm going to do it my way. I'm going to have this to happen. Now, oil is ruled by Neptune. Neptune in this chart is trine Venus, the planet of love, beauty, but also the planet of money. And this was a time of making, a movement forward would have great economic impact for a long period of time. I don't know the time of day that this oil well, was drilled, but the moon was definitely in Virgo, because no matter how late it was in the day or how early it was in the day, the moon would still be in Virgo. Mercury is in Virgo as well and trine Pluto, um, with tremendous effort and determination focused on Earth, Taurus and Gemini, Taurus and in Virgo. So it's the Earth sign. But Mercury is square Uranus. Now, Uranus is the breakthrough planet. What does Mercury square Uranus mean? It means I see something that nobody else sees. It's unique, and I'm going to run with it, which is the introduction at this time of a new technology that altered the course of civilization. Now, Mercury is squaring Uranus, but both of them are in aspect to the sun, Mars. Uranus, Mars, sun here shows that there would be a rapid pickup on this and that we'd be off to the races. Now, since we're up here, I'm going to take another jump forward. In 1885, Carl Benz had the first working automobile. If you look at that chart, here we have Mars rules internal combustion, Mars to Mercury conjunct. Again, I don't know the time of day, but we will just say the Neptune Jupiter square and Neptune Uranus trine shows that we are off to the races. Jupiter squaring Neptune shows, unintended consequences emerging from our optimism. And the Uranus trine Neptune shows that we are manifesting the fruits of the Industrial Revolution, which started in 1821. So this was a very, very coup hoop-de-doo. I know I'm skipping around a lot and showing a lot of different charts, but in order to do justice to Sally's question, you have to understand the backdrop of what happened here, how we got to where we were going. Now, this is interesting to me. It may be interesting to you. This was the first petroleum engine in 1862. Well, okay. This was again right after the Saturn Jupiter conjunction, opening up cycle, squaring Uranus, and Neptune here is in Aries and in mutual reception with Mars in Pisces. We could talk a lot about this chart, but I'm just wanted to point out this was the first petroleum engine. Guess what? Oh God, I missed it. Where did it go? This is the same year that we had the first petroleum powered engine. We had the first man-made plastic. Alexander Park introduced a substitute for ivory and other exotic products that could be used as building material, packing material, and so on. So it's almost identical charts. And again, plastic and gasoline, oil products, are the big scapegoats here. So I wanted to take a minute to talk about the shaping of our culture today, which goes back to the Neptune-Pluto conjunction, August 2nd, 1891. Now, what you will, again, it's an almost 500-year cycle. So when we talk about climate change, we're talking about something that's gigantic. This chart shows, what the way into the difficulties that we have now and the way out. Now, the striking feature of this chart is the Sun-Mars conjunction is in sextile to the Pluto-Neptune conjunction. Why this is important is that it shows the great amount of energy that goes into this cycle of creation. Now, the cycle just before this, the Neptune Saturn conjunction took place in the sign Gemini. Well, it was only basically in the greater scheme of things, it was only a handful of years before the most important invention in civilization took place, which was movable type by Gutenberg in 1400. That was also in Gemini. What does Gemini represent? It's get information, get in, let's communicate, let's get stuff out there. So this is the age of communication, double. I mean, we've gone to, this is a second cycle of that. Now, if you'll notice, the north node of the moon is always in the sign of where the collective dharma is. What is our job? Well, what it was at the time that this took place was exactly that. Gemini, get the heck out there, take a look around, see what we can see, gather information. What's the south node of the moon? Some hard to repress craving. And where is it? It's in Sagittarius. Well, what is the downside of Sagittarius? Sagittarius is sanctimonious, ideological. Does it sound familiar? Well, it should, because, ta-da, look at the chart for today. Here we have the south node of the moon in Sagittarius, north node in Gemini. It's sort of like, when you think about it, it's sort of like Dwayne Price and NCIS New Orleans saying, go learn something. Go out and find some facts, get some more information. And what's the south node of the moon doing? I don't care about the facts. As the philosopher Hegel said, when somebody says, well, your theory isn't supported by the facts. And he says, if the facts don't support my theory, so much the worse for the facts, which is like talking to somebody who tells you that Donald Trump won the election or that the vaccine is a hoax, any number of conspiracy theories that flies in the face of anything that is realistic. So why am I trotting down this path here? I wanted you to understand that this chart for the next 500 years almost tells a story. Venus being square Uranus shows that our pattern of relating to each other, the way that we form love bonds is destined to change dramatically. Now, Venus is in Cancer. Cancer is maudlin sentimentality. It's past oriented. It's nurturing, nostalgic. What is Uranus in Libra saying? Uranus in Libra is saying, hey, let's kick out the jams. We got to find a new way of being. You don't like your gender? Let's change it. You don't like, you're a man, you want to be in love with another man? That's fine. You're a woman, you want to be in love with another woman or with your pet ostrich? Fine. It doesn't matter. Love is love. And, and, and Venus in Cancer comes along with that, what would you say, kicking and screaming. Now, what is the beauty of this chart? Look at how we got Neptune, we got Pluto, we got Mercury, Saturn, and Jupiter, all in mutable signs. Well, what is mutability? Mutability is flexibility. It is the wisdom ingredient. You know, we have the cardinal signs like Uranus, the moon, and Venus are in cardinal signs. They're active. They take action. And what are fixed signs? Fixed signs are stubborn. They hold tight. They're where we're going to be. Well, what's the mutable signs? Mutability is thinking, figuring things out. Now, look at this. These planets down here, Neptune and Pluto, are at the base of what's called a T-square. A T-square is where one planet, in this case, two planets, are square to others that oppose each other. And here we've got Mercury being pulled into the fray. So what is a T-square? A T-square is it's like a four-legged stool missing a leg. And it has to stay, it's like Mark Edmund Jones, one of my early teachers, used to say, riding a bicycle is like a T-square. If you stay in motion, you can stay balanced. If you stand still, it's very hard to stay balanced. And what kind of motion do we need? It's mental motion, meaning we start with this climate change by recognizing, hey, that boat left already. We're not going back. The seas rising, we're going to have hotter temperatures than we've ever had before. We're going to have drought in places that we've, don't get enough water and it'll be severe. And the rain is going to be like over the top. Well, okay. Once we start with that, it isn't just, well, how do we get off the planet? How do we, develop a spacecraft to get out of here? It's like, okay, this is a collective problem, just like the pandemic is a collective problem. If you remember, if you were in my talk on the voting rights, it was like I was saying, it's easy for Democrats to point the finger at Republicans and say, you guys are doing this terrible gerrymandering. Well, the truth of the matter is, if you look at the history over the last 100 years, when Democrats have been in power, often they've done the same thing. And just, terrible gerrymandering. It's like, once we recognize that we really are, not just like in your mind, but when you at a heart level embrace the idea that we really are all in this together. And you have to have this come to Jesus moment when nobody has a gun to your head. It's easy when you know that you're going to die in a minute if you don't change. to go through an epiphany, but to recognize it in the cooler moments, just logically stand back and recognize this is the right thing and we have to do what's right. It's sort of like looking at in politics, looking at the Liz Cheneys of the world, which you politically may disagree with, but you have to respect the fact that she stood up for democracy, for what was in the rule of law, when it wasn't the expedient thing for her espoused political mission. We need the same thing in climate change, meaning that people who could benefit financially by raping the planet realize that uh, chopping down the rainforest, manufacturing single-use plastic is detrimental. Now, this chart shows that yes, we could do that. We can come up with a solution. But where is the alternate point? We got 5 planets immutable. What isn't being covered? It's Sagittarius, which Sagittarius is ethics. It is the higher mental categories of existence, of experience. We need an overriding philosophy that we put into action, that we embrace at a heart level and move forward with collectively. Is that an unrealistic thing to ask? Well, you can say that it is, but the truth of the matter is, if we don't, we're screwed. And so holding out for that through our understanding is is the way to the promised land. Now, if you're in a very bad marriage, meaning it's totally abusive, but you're hanging on to it, and I've had a number of clients in this spot where I've said to them, hey, look it doesn't get any better. You deserve better than this. Well, he's all I have. Or, she's better than being by myself. Well, no, she isn't better than being by yourself. And to be able to look yourself in the mirror and say, I deserve better than this, and I'm not going to get better than this unless I leave, unless I call it quits. It's recognizing that the world we've destroyed is terrible. People cutting down old growth trees, it's like it tugs at my heart. Watching people abuse each other or treat animals or the vegetable kingdom or any of Mother Earth poorly, it hurts. But the point is, we don't get there unless we are willing to just recognize, hey, what we've done has led us here. We've got to do something different. Now, Gutenberg press was developed under Jupiter trine Uranus. Jupiter trine Uranus is a get out of jail free card. Now, Uranus and Neptune were out of sign, but square each other. And this was the challenge, meaning a new technology had a breakthrough, but we hadn't developed a new economic model yet. But the whole world changed. If you read Marshall McLuhan, he explains, that our mindset changed with the development of movable type. I believe he overstates the case, but if you read the book, The Gutenberg Galaxy, it makes a wonderful case for when we stopped living in circular houses and started living with the walls at right angles to each other. that was a direct result of this transition of consciousness. And we went through the Copernican revolution, a short time thereafter, which the whole model of the way that the universe operates changed. Now I'm going to just jump forward. I wanted to show you again with Neptune and Pluto. This was just before the Gutenberg press was developed. This was the last Neptune Pluto conjunction. It took place with the south node of the moon in Gemini, which was, we were moving into a time when what we needed was ideology, a religion, an ideal binding us together. We're at the inverse of that now with the north node of the moon in Gemini and the south node in Sagittarius. Okay, I'm going to take a stab at one more, just to show you. This was from 905, the conjunction of Neptune and Pluto, and it was trine Uranus, and we had Mercury trine Jupiter. Now, why this is important is that it was all in Earth, and this was the beginning of the Middle Ages, and it was time to get the Earth moving again. It was a wild cycle. Why I'm showing you this is because I wanted to show you that the ban on coal took place 400 years later in 1306, but it was still under the banner of this conjunction. And it was, say, the tug of war between clean air and the economic model that was creating the pollution. The economy won out. It was gonna win out, short-term gain over the long-term viability of the planet. But where we are now, it's really the long-term that we are having. Now, Sally, you asked about the next 25 years. There's a couple of things that I could show you here that I think might be of interest on this question. Now, if you look, breakthrough culture and life are connected to the transcendental planets. And, we see this, large motion of culture being pushed by the the Neptune, Pluto, and Uranus showing the breakthroughs. Now, I wanted to show you one other thing here. Let me see. If you look at this as the outer planets conjunction, we went through this, and I talked about this in another lecture, Uranus-Pluto conjunction and the square between the two that took place between 2012 and 2015, upsetting the apple cart from a lot of the ideology that sprung into existence back in the middle to late 60s. Uranus-Neptune, as I say, started this new economic model with their conjunction in 1993. The last one before that, as I said, was in 1821. Well, guess what? They're going into sextile in 2025. Why this is important is this will be the time that we start in my estimation, applying the technology that moves us out of the death grip of what we've created for ourselves. Now, it won't be instantaneous by any stretch of the imagination. Um, all the way up until 2030, we'll be in this opening cycle under the auspices of the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, which is the chronology of the expanse over the next 10 years. And then there'll be a contraction. But the point is, if you and I, probably everybody here, unless you were born before the Second World War, was born under the sextile of Neptune and Pluto. Now, Neptune and Pluto are going to be exactly sextile each other 50 times between 1950 and 2032. So 72 years, 76 years, and 82 years, a lot of years here. We go through this. Well, what is the sextile between the two? It is an opportunity to materialize through our thought process the good that was promised back in the conjunction of Neptune and Pluto. That's why it is easy for me as an astrologer to say what you think about makes a difference. What you do makes a difference. Yes, it isn't enough to vote. It isn't enough to recycle. It isn't enough to tell your friends. It isn't enough to meditate. It isn't enough to go door to door and preaching the gospel about how we have to get out of this dilemma. It's learning, all of us, to go beyond our own small life and be of service, genuine service to others, to the people that we don't even know. That being a secret Santa for as many people as we can, and to do it with an open heart, knowing that if we survive, it will be because because divine intervention prompted the inspiration in the heart of each individual to go and do what you've always known was the right thing, whether it seemed like it was going to work or not, whether it seemed like it would happen. Okay, so the Neptune-Pluto sextile has taken place, will continue to take place, while Neptune is between 17 degrees of Libra and 14 degrees of Aries, and where Pluto is between 17 degrees of Leo and 14 degrees of Aquarius. So these two planets are covering a hell of a lot of real estate in the zodiac over this 70 plus year period of time. And what I'm saying to you today is, yes, we will apply technology that's already with us, and we will discover new technology in the process of applying what we already know. Do you know a whole lot of innovation came from the space project? And NASA spawned thousands of inventions that had applications in our everyday life and beyond Tang, of course. But I'm saying all of these things happened not just serendipitously, but when we were just doing what came natural to us. And I'm saying if what comes natural to us during this period uh, uh, is good, then the end result will be good. Now, it is important to recognize that right now Neptune is in Pisces. What at the heart level is a great stimulus to culture. It is the unfoldment of a lot of great spiritual ideals and inclinations toward the divine. But Neptune goes into Aries in 2025 and 2026, about a year long, you know, modulation going back and forth and finally ending up in Aries. Pluto goes out of Capricorn into Aquarius in 2024. And Uranus finally leaves Taurus and goes into Gemini between July 2025 and April of 2026. These are all revolutionary years, but all of these things are taking place in a relatively short period of time. So we will get a handle on climate change in 2024, 2025, 2026. And I believe that the political will and the raising of human consciousness on the planet will start to take effect. Things that you and I and all of the people that are intimately connected with us are going through right now at an emotional and psychological level will start to take effect then. Now, in the last, again, I went around the mulberry bush with this a little bit more than I intended. I had another dozen charts that I wanted to show you today, because the deeper I got into studying this, the more fascinating it became to me, and I could see the clear linkage of what's going on in the human psyche now. The struggle between how invested are we in self-interest. Self-interest built the modern world. Um, it was at the time of the Buddha and shortly thereafter where the whole idea of the individual took off. You know, before that, it was an organic picture that your life only had value based on how you related to the collective. And since then, it's been, and I could give you hundreds of historical examples of how that worked out. But the point is, we're at the end process of that now. Spiritually, to evolve, it is the same thing that built civilization is now destroying it. And to be able to put self-interest behind us is so important. And we will be doing that over the next 3, 4, 5 years. Okay. Now, Judy, I apologize. I had planned on spending a little bit more time on your, more specific question of what about the polar ice caps? Well, they're gone. I mean, they're not entirely gone, but they might as well be. They're evaporating. Other than the raising of sea levels, sinking of a lot of islands that we might think of as being wonderful, people on Mauritius will migrate to other places, and Kilban and a lot of other islands will be like that, unless they import technology from the Netherlands. Yeah, how the Netherlands reclaimed lands. New Orleans is 9 feet below sea level. There are ways of adapting, but it ain't cheap, and it requires not just brain power, but lots of energy and lots of dollars to make it happen. The problem with the ice caps receding is that they expose permafrost, which releases tremendous amounts of methane, and it's one of the five greenhouse gases. And it, the permafrost right now is releasing more uh, methane than all, the cows in the world, passing gas, and all of the oil wells, venting methane. This is a much bigger deal than any of that, but they're all interlinked. We wouldn't be raising beef for food if people weren't buying hamburgers at McDonald's. Uh, if they weren't buying hamburgers at McDonald's, they wouldn't be deforesting the Brazilian rainforest. I mean, all of these things relate to each other. But people want, Americans particular, but in the human species now, often just want short, quick solutions. There aren't any. And it's sort of like a client of mine showing me an ad for a guy who was promising if you came to his workshop, this was back in the 80s, that you would obtain enlightenment over the weekend. Can you believe it? Something that takes millions of lifetimes. He's going to show you a way to get it over a weekend. Oh, that's great. It's like there is no simple solution. As I say, the Earth's geography will change in our lifetime exponentially. Um, People will move, and they will live further away. Uh, People in Miami, lots of them will lose their entire multi-million-dollar investments that are living on the beach where the roads flood every time that the tides come in. Uh, yes, it would be possible to reclaim it, but it wouldn't be something that an individual could do on his own or her own. It's something that we'd have to make a judgment. Yes, saving these 25 multi-million-dollar homes is worth us spending $1 billion collectively of taxpayers' money. I don't think that people are going to look for solutions along those lines so much. There's a guy who's building a city out in the middle of the desert that supposedly will house 50,000 people, will be sustainable. No, everybody will be able to walk to work. All the greenhouse spaces will be open. Well, the happiest city, the happiest country on the planet is usually Denmark. Well, you see so many people in Denmark lived communally, where they have their own family pods, but they all have a collective kitchen and share resources and stuff. Yeah, all of that is coming. It's kind of an anathema to the American spirit, which is very Aquarian, very Uranian, everybody on their own, which is fine, except we are our brother's keeper. We do have to take concern because climate change, like the pandemic, teaches us that without social responsibility and all of us working together, we are as extinct as a million species of animals and plants are over the last 2 years. Anyway, I want to leave you on this note. We will get through this. It's not an easy solution, meaning that it isn't something that we can just snap our fingers and make it happen. But we will develop character as a culture and as a people going through the next 10 years. The next 3 years will be critical, and the next 5, 6 years we will have turned the corner, where we will see technology being, applied. Somebody who is really, really rich could go out and, have boats that started collecting all of the micro plastics out of the ocean. But what good would that be if people are still putting it there? It's sort of like my sister Dawn, who is a nurse, said um, to one of her friends, that's about 20 years ago, and her husband drank a lot. And he says, you ought to get him on the list for um, a liver donation for the transplant. And my sister Dawn, who's a no-nonsense Scorpio, said, oh, that would be a waste of a good liver. Why would you do that when he's not even fighting for his health that way? It's sort of like that. We've hit that point where we have to turn the corner collectively. And each of you is a candle in the night. You have more of an effect than you could possibly imagine. It's there and is there to be released. I thank you all for sharing some time with me. I'm not going to take questions today, but next month, if there are lingering thoughts or questions that anybody has for any of this, you're welcome to share it with me by email or to ask it off the top of the deck. As I say, I have 2 questions already for next month, which I will try to do justice to, which has to do with democracy and the other with the pandemic. So all of you take care, and I hope you have a pleasant rest of the Sunday. I don't know about where you are, but we're having the mildest summer I ever remember here. Talk about climate change. It's really, really quite something. We've been through the hottest months without breaking a single record, and with it being relatively, for southern Florida, relatively mild. Whereas, in places like the North West, it's been 30 degrees hotter. Go figure. Anyway, you take care. Namaste. I love you. Have a good one.